Art, Theosophy and Spirituality. And she has a master's degree in fine arts in art history from University of Shantikhetan in India. She joined the Theosophical Society in 1986 in Bangalore and moved to New Zealand in 2008. She's worked in the editorial office at the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society in Adyar. That was between 1995 and 97 and 2005 and 2008. She also has a deep interest in the different religions and cultures of the world and their impact on art. Currently, Sushma is working as the Business Development Manager for Freelancer PA. Now, her topic this evening is, as our introductory session to this topic, is influence of Theosophy on art and an overview. Now, I'll just say a little bit more in terms of what Sushma is going to be presenting, because she says that modern Theosophy has had considerable influence on the work of visual artists, particularly painters and artists such as Kandinsky, Mondrian, and Hilma Klint, who chose Theosophy as their main ideological and philosophical basis for their work. The presentation tonight will examine how Theosophy had an impact on the various art forms over the century, especially in the visual arts. Sushma will also examine the influence of Theosophy from ancient to modern times on art, poetry, and literature. So, Sushma, it's great to have you here, and over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Welcome, everybody. We've actually got a couple of our guest speaker tuning in today. So welcome. I'll just remove the spotlight so people can see each other for a minute. Can you all see each other for just a bit of on the right? I think Joanna is here. Hello, and Sam Sampson. They are our guest speakers in the next month, so welcome. Joanna is from Dunedin and Sam is from Auckland. So yeah, you'll get a chance to say hello. Hope you'll stay a few minutes after the meeting. So let's begin on the new topic, Art, Theosophy and Spirituality. It was inspired by the recent exhibition of Hilma F. Klint. Simon, Sai and Arzu and I went together to the the city gallery, and it was so inspiring to see the exhibition. This little red circle with the blue circle and black and white is one of her paintings. So we'll go ahead. Okay, I have a disclaimer before we begin. This presentation is based on my personal understanding and research on the influence of Theosophy in art from ancient till modern times. It's only a brief overview to form a basis for the upcoming sessions, which will go in more detail. This is not the view of the Theosophical Society. And all the photos I've used, I've taken from Wikipedia, which is all on public domain. Because when something goes public, like this video will be on YouTube, it's important that there's no copyright infringement. So I thought I will mention that right at the start. So coming back to our theme, art, spirituality, theosophy, we will go into a little bit. I would like you all to imagine you're going to be time traveling with me. Think of yourself as if you're on Star Trek with seat belts on, because this is going to be a real ride. So if you have your seat belts fastened, you'll have to listen to my instructions. I'm the flight attendant. So what I would like to share with you today is how Theosophy has influenced all parts of human life. However, today's focus is mostly art, poetry, and some literature. So coming to why did these artists and the poets, why were they influenced? First of all, I'd like to quote from one of our theosophical gems. We have 3 of them. One is called At the Feet of the Master by Alcyone. We have the other one called Light on the Path by Mabel Collins. Sorry, there's a typo in this. It's Collins. And the third one is The Voice of the Silence. So the light on the path says, within you is the light of the world. The only light that can be shed upon the path. If you're unable to perceive it within you, it is useless to look for it elsewhere. So now the thing is, you will see that many of the artists I'm going to share with you about today did exactly that. They were looking for their light within. Now we come to another part of the theme, which is spirituality. So what is the spiritual life? This is our past president, Brother Bernier. She was the 7th president of the Theosophical Society. And in her book that says, with the title, No Other Path to Go, she says, finding out what is spiritual is itself the leading of the spiritual life. But the great truths of life are not external facts, but dimensions of consciousness. Now, when I read this, it just blew me away, because we are always thinking that our work life and our daily life, our family life is not the spiritual life, and that if we are only engaged in activities that look spiritual, we think we are living a spiritual life. However, just the act of finding out what is spiritual is itself the leading of the spiritual life. And you will see it evident in the art of what are many of the modern artists and also people of ancient times. So let's get started on our journey. I hope you're all on the spaceship with me by now. So here we go. So Theosophy is called by many names. Now, most presentations, when it talks about Theosophy influencing in art, they mostly deal with the modern Theosophical movement and how it influenced the modern art. However, I'd like to draw your attention to how Theosophy is actually something that is inherent in all of us. The seeds were planted in the mind, which is a higher mind level, of humanity when humanity began. So if you look at the history of humanity, Theosophy was presented to human beings at different times, in different geographical areas, and they are all known in different names. So I have five of them here. So Brahma Vidya, it was known as Brahma Vidya in India. So it's not like any, Vidya means knowledge and wisdom. So it's not just wisdom of any kind, but the wisdom of the ultimate reality or the Sanatana Dharma. And in China, it is known as the Tao. I'm not sure how to say the second name. So it's the teaching of the way. And now those who are familiar with the Tao will know it's something that cannot be spoken of, it cannot be perceived, it cannot be thought about, it cannot be smelt, it cannot be described. So that's what is the nature of Brahma as well, Brahman. So Sufism is a part of the esoteric side of Islam, and that is also the theosophical side of Islam. So that is the way of those who wear wool. That's the literal meaning of being a Sufi, those who wear the woolen garment, the pure or the wise. And then there is the Christa Theologia, which is in Christianity. Now, I haven't studied much about this part of it. However, it's the ancient thought about divine matters. So that's something maybe in the future I could study and find out what it actually means. And then we have the secret doctrine, also called the wisdom tradition, the perennial philosophy, and the ancient wisdom. Now, the secret doctrine, as we know it, is in the form of a book, which is the magnum opus of H.P. Blavatsky. However, there is actually a secret doctrine, which of course is secret only because we haven't learned how to perceive it. It's in plain sight, just like the Tao. If we can perceive it and experience it, then the secret is no longer a secret. So this, in this context, we are not talking about the 3-volume book with the index. Now, I'd like to share with you the evolution of how art and things happened, but also to point out to you that how theosophy or the divine wisdom or the Brahma Vidya was sort of represented by not being able to represent it. It's a paradox. You can't really represent something that is formless, odorless, unperceivable. However, human beings have always tried to do it. And art and poetry is one way that you can do it instead of prose. So here we have a couple of examples. Now, symbolism also, of course, plays a huge role in this whole story, because that which you cannot explain in words, you end up using symbols. So now on your left is what we call a relief on the Sanchi Stupa, where you will see there is a Bodhi tree on the left, with people are all bowing down to. It indicates the enlightenment of the Buddha. And in that period, they never showed the form of the Buddha. They never sculpted or painted the form. He was always represented by a tree, this wheel, the wheel of the Dharma. He was probably represented by footprint and things like that. So this is the very early Buddhist way of depicting enlightenment, because again, it's something you can't express or represent. So the thing on the wheel symbol on the right denotes the eightfold path. So it has 8 spokes. So that was as soon as the Buddha attained enlightenment, which is, he gave the first sermon, and it was on the 4 noble truths, and then the 4 and the eightfold path, the noble eightfold path. So this is another sculpture where there are 4 people, and there's, again, you'll see the symbol of the wheel. I think there's, the relief of the Buddha, you can see his hand, I think it's broken here. But that's how, so again, you see there is a pillar here that they are bowing down to. And so that's how they're represented. Some of the esoteric side of things. And then the on the right is I think a Tibetan Thangka. And again, you'll see very abstract image of the cycle of rebirth. I mean, unless you know how to read this symbolism and understand its, intricacies, the color and other things, this just looks like a funny drawing. However, this is a representation of the cycle of rebirth. Then we come to Mahayana Buddhism. There are many sculptures and paintings of the Buddha and his life story and things like that. But I chose this particular miniature, Mongolian miniature, which depicts a monk generating a tantric visualization. Now you will see that it's coming from somewhere in his heart area. It's kind of emerging from him. I thought if you keep this image in mind, you will be able to understand why I chose it. Because just notice the colors in a circle, and there are some symbols. There's a lotus, there's a half or crescent moon, and there's a dorje as well. That is the thunderbolt. So by the time of Mahayana Buddhism, the figurative representation of, the Buddha and his enlightenment and other, even the Lotus Sutra and all were sort of being represented in form. It was a flourishing time by the time they reached the Mahayana period. And then this is the ultimate of Indian aesthetics. This is the sculpture of Shiva who is dancing. This is actually the dance of creation. There are many interpretations. The whole Indian aesthetics philosophy on art, you can interpret the whole thing in this just one figure. So this is called Nataraja. It was a sculpture from a bronze cast from 10th to 11th century AD, which was the peak of the art movement, you could say, in India at that time. There are several temples and paintings and everything at that period, but I chose this because this actually represents the most abstract ideas that anyone can come up with. So the whole system of Indian philosophy pertaining to art, because even to make a figure stand up like this with the centrifugal, whatever, if you're an artist, you'll know, to make it stand like this on one leg, to get the proportions right, and if everything is symbolic in this, and again, if you see this, it invokes something within you. So this is a representative of what I thought was the whole Indian art aspect of how the esoteric side of the wisdom and art was represented in Indian art. There are, of course, the whole Puranas and stories that have been represented in sculpture, painting, and dance and poetry. However, this is the most abstract of them. Then we travel to China now in the Taoist period. I only have one painting. Like I said, I'm restricted to what is in the public domain. When I studied art history, I studied Taoist painting and Zen painting and things like that. Of course, in books, you can see all of them. However, I just chose one to represent the 6 specimens, a Taoist influenced 13th century Chinese painting by the monk Mu Chi, I think I would say. So what I wanted to show here is, again, the Tao cannot be expressed, so there are no figurative representations. There are some paintings of Lao Tzu, and there's some on one of them on a buffalo and things like that. So it has lots of meanings. And the picture on the right is a Chinese garden, which is based on the Taoist philosophy. And my first visit was to such a garden was in Dunedin, and I was so blown away. It was such an amazing design. I thought in some life in my karma, I wish I could stay in a house like that. That if you stay, we are looking at this picture from here, and I'm sure it has a meaning, because there's water on both sides. There are lotus leaves. There is that building, and the path is going zigzag. Everything had meaning. So the Taoist philosophy actually permeated all aspects of Chinese life before Confucianism and other things became more prominent. So that's, again, if you remember, Taoism is theosophy, and it affected all areas of life in China in that period. The meditation, the visual art, I'm not so sure about music, and maybe poetry even. Coming to poetry, I would say the Tao Te Ching is an amazing text, you could say, on actually the whole theosophical, divine wisdom again. So here's a small sample of what the chapter 4 has to say. This is a very modern translation. Again, because it's on public domain, I was able to share it with you. So I'll just recite it, or just read it out. It says, the Tao is like an empty container. It can never be emptied and can never be filled. Infinitely deep, it is the source of all things. It dulls the sharp, unties the knotted, shades the lighted, and unites all of creation with dust. It is hidden but always present. I don't know who gave birth to it. It is older than the concept of God. I mean, this is just an indication of what the rest of the book is. And again, it's not one person sitting and writing a book. I think there are, if you do some research, I think it is a collection of sayings or poetry. I'm not really sure, but it's assigned to Lao Tzu, as we know it. But of course, you can never time these things. Taoism was a lot of centuries ago. So unless you get written or, manuscript documentation, you can't really say this was written by one person. And it doesn't need to be. The point is that this theosophical perspective existed in China too. I and here we are with Japan, because the Taoist tradition went to Japan and became the Chan from China, became Zen in Japan. Now I just have some couple of images for this to just give you a perspective on it. So all of you must be familiar with this circle. It's called the Enso of Zen. So wherever you see it, you'll know it is Zen, isn't it? And it's something, it's representing eternity. It could represent anything. So all these things invoke something within you that your normal mind cannot grasp. And that's the purpose of all these attempts at representing the unrepresentable. And then here's a splashed ink landscape. It says Haboku Sanshui by Seishu Toyo, 1495. I know we talk a lot about Western abstract art and things like that. I mean, this is also equally abstract. It looks like a landscape, but can you even say what it's showing? Just looks like a splash of ink. However, if you spend some time, you can see the mountains at the back, maybe a suggestion of trees. So it could be easily called Japanese Impressionist painting. However, this was in the 15th century, long before the modern Impressionist art became popular in Europe. And even this little circle of Zen, that's also abstract. So now we come to the Middle East with Sufism, and that's sort of a more recent movement. Now I'd like to say that sometime in the past, I'd come across somewhere that because of the Theosophical movement that began in 1875, Sufism and Zen and other such movements was able to become better known in all over the world. Before that, as you can see, they were all in, the teachers were in the mountains, very hard to get access. So it was probably quite locally probably known. In fact, even the Taoist monks and really evolved monks were not well known. The student had to really search for them. So it was after the Theosophical Society's, emergence in the West that there were an acceptance for these kind of teachings became a little bit more easier. Otherwise, and also we'll come to that and how the exchange of information took place. So Sufism is a mystic body of religious practice within Islam, characterized by a focus on Islamic spirituality, ritualism, asceticism, and esotericism. Now, again, the Sufi philosophy and principles and teachings are very, very interesting, and the stories that they narrate for teaching those principles, they are amazing too. So when we come to art of the Sufis, most of you know that Islam does not allow form representation of forms. You'll see a lot of text and music. So in some parts of the world, Islam doesn't allow music either. However, because of Sufism, music became popular too. So this is a picture of the 6 Sufis. I'm not sure who they are. However, this is just a representation of 6 of them. And you'll see like the blue halo around 2 of them. So I'm assuming that they are 2 important ones. And then many of you are familiar with the whirling dervishes. Now that's more after Rumi became popular. Of course, no one liked him when he was doing it, suddenly starting whirling in the marketplace and others joining him. However, it's become very popular now. So in Sufi music and poetry, I'd just like to mention two styles. One is called a Qawwali, which is best known form of Sufi music and is most commonly found in the Sufi culture in South Asia, especially Pakistan and many parts of India and probably in other places. However, the Qawwali is very, very popular as far as I know in India. It's gone into the Hindi movie music as well. So I know lots of very popular songs in the Qawwali style. However, what I've heard is when someone who is really into it and they're doing the Qawwali style of music, people in the audience do go into ecstasy. They just start dancing. I mean, it's just amazing. I've heard stories of it. Hopefully one day I'll be able to attend one. And then this one on the left bottom, this picture of the whirling dervishes, it's part of a Sema ceremony, and it is set to a particular form of music, and it's instrumental. And then as you keep spinning around, you do go into a sort of trance-like state. So when you talk about the influence of Theosophy, here is another attempt to connect to something that is not of your daily experience. It is not of something you can describe. And even after you've had this experience, you cannot come and talk about it. So again, it's like the Tao, it's like Theosophy, it's like what H.P. Blavatsky wrote as a first fundamental proposition, that there is this one that is unthinkable, undescribable, immutable principle, one that permeates everything, and we are all part of it, the one. And here is every human being throughout the centuries trying to get in touch with it, and in many ways. Coming to Sufi poetry, the most famous of them, of course, is Rumi. There are a few others called Hafiz, and I knew quite a few names in the past. I used to study quite a bit of this. However, I've chosen just one for you. And this actually describes what we learn in theosophical literature about the evolution of matter. I will recite this poem to you. It says, I died from minerality and became vegetable. And from vegetativeness, I died and became animal. I died from animality and became man. Then why fear disappearance through death? Next time I shall die, bringing forth wings and feathers like angels. After that, soaring higher than angels, what you cannot imagine, I shall be that. Soul receives from soul that knowledge, therefore not by book nor from tongue. If knowledge of mysteries come after emptiness of mind, that is illumination of heart. If thou wilt be observant and vigilant, thou wilt see it every moment, the response to thy action. Be observant if thou wouldst have a pure heart, for something is born to thee in consequence of every action. Now, just in these few verses, it's talking about evolution. It's talking about the law of karma. It's talking about the fact that this knowledge, which is the secret doctrine, cannot be read, that is therefore not by book nor from tongue. If knowledge of mysteries come after emptiness of mind, that is illumination of heart. So this is exactly what we study in the theosophical books that we are familiar with. And even right at the start, Radha Bernier said, if you can't, it's not a collection of facts, it is a dimension of consciousness. So again, poetry is, influenced by the ultimate teaching, which is common to all humanity and all traditions. Now we come to Europe. Now I hope your seatbelts are still fastened, because suddenly we're jumping from Sufism to Neoplatonism. Probably this is 3rd century AD, so we're in Egypt now. I didn't look up for any Egyptian images because most of us are familiar with such a popular civilization. However, I thought I'll share with you what you might have not known. So this is Plotinus. It seems there are 4 such, portraits, but it's not proven that it's him. It's all right. I'm sure all men look like this in that period. So we don't need to worry too much about how he looked, but it's interesting what his ideas were. So Neoplatonism synthesized ideas from earlier philosophical and religious traditions, namely Platonism, Aristotelianism, and Stoicism. Now, what's interesting is in H.P. Blavatsky mentions the Neoplatonists in her Key to Theosophy, because someone asked her, or rather the inquirer, she wrote the Key to Theosophy in the Socrates method. So there's an inquirer and a person who answers the question. So the inquirer says, how will you manage to spread the ideas of theosophy among all these olden traditional religions and all these, in 1875, whatever was the situation. So she said, well, we'll do exactly what the Neoplatonists did. Because even when the Neoplatonists were, existent on planet Earth, since we are in Star Trek ship, they also had to, be in a world which was all the Greek mythological kind of world, where religion was very, very prominent, the Greek religion, and whatever was happening in Egypt. So, the middle paragraph says, in writing on art, Plotinus argued that the artist, in creating his work, directly imitates the forms of this ideal reality, which are experienced as beauty. Now we have to remember the Greeks and the Egyptians laid a great emphasis on beauty in that period. So Plotinus had a lot to say about art. And you should also make a note that here is another attempt to synthesize several philosophies. So again, you have to imagine a world where people are all saying, I know the truth, and how the way I think is the only way. So here is someone trying to synthesize it. And I don't think he was popular either. Anyway, here is an example. It actually looks like they're talking about the Theosophical Society. Plotinus' school was open to all women and men and attracted people who just wanted to hear his lectures or attend meetings or seminars or participate in open philosophical discussions, whilst others came to seek a philosophical way of life, and others attended because they wanted to become philosophers. Isn't that amazing? Imagine Greece and Egypt in 245 AD, and all these temples and things around you, and then they want to come to this philosopher and listen to his talks and have discussions on all these deep subjects. I'm just feeling I was there. Anyway, this presentation has been very inspiring to put together for me. Then again, now we time travel to 15th century in Europe, the Renaissance movement. So again, the Neoplatonism became very prominent because the people of Greece and Rome and other European countries discovered the ancient classical Greeks, the philosophy and their sculpture and things like that. Before that, it was the Middle Ages, you must remember. So the life was quite different. Everything was happening underneath, like the whole esoteric side was hidden away because I think the Christian church was not very open to anything that they didn't decide was that you need to know. And I think a lot of crusades and things were happening as well for several centuries. So this was the 14th and 15th century early Renaissance, and the high Renaissance period was when people started discovering Plato's works and Socrates and everyone else they could think of, which was of the classical period. Again, an aside of theosophical sort of knowledge, I had read somewhere that the souls who had incarnated in Greece and Rome in the ancient times also reincarnated in the 15th century. So to complete whatever work they had, begun. So again, the ideal of beauty became very important, and to find the ultimate reality through art, music and sculpture and things like that. So again, it's on a higher cycle, of course, of the spiral. And again, and whatever the Renaissance period came up with, we are still using it. If you look at the building of the old Dunedin Lodge and the current Wellington Lodge and the Palmerston North Lodge, our facade is like the Parthenon, with the triangle on top and the pillars on the side. So we have many buildings like that still in India as well. And most of Europe still has the Greek lines. So here we again come to Neoplatonism and what they did in 15th century. This philosophy focused on the spiritual and cosmological aspects of Platonic thought, synthesizing Platonism with Egyptian and Jewish theology. Now that was the original Neoplatonism. The Renaissance Neoplatonism was the creation of the 15th century Florentines Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. I think I did well. And had a profound and far-reaching impact on the cultural as well as the intellectual and religious life of Europe for well over 2 centuries. Now, these two people, Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, they had a great influence. And in fact, the patron of Marsilio Ficino was the Medici. So, and he was the one who commissioned most of Michelangelo's work. So they had a great impact on the rest of the artists as well in that period. So here we have a couple of samples of art at that time. And I chose this School of Athens by Raphael, because again, it just shows us how, Plato, I think that's Plato or Aristotle right in the center. And the School of Athens, where people are doing all the thinking and writing, and there's so many discussions happening. I thought you can just have a look at this particular picture and just feel the classicalness of it. So there were 3 artists at that time who were very, intent on the Neoplatonic style. So Raphael's work is admired for its clarity of form, ease of composition, and visual achievement of the Neoplatonic ideal of human grandeur. Together with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, he forms the traditional trinity of great masters of that period. So this is again, you'll see when we started, the Neoplatonists had the worldview that there was one God and that human being was the ideal. And they wanted to represent a human being, not with all their flaws, but as the ideal, which is what the Greeks did too. This is my favorite painting. I don't know, from the minute I saw it, just the fact that, those 2, Adam and God, it's like he's just infusing life into him. Just that finger, almost touching. I've always loved this painting. This is on the Sistine Chapel. It's called Creation of Adam. Now you will notice this is a representation of something that is quite abstract, even though he's using form like as we know it, but then everything is idealized. And it points to something beyond what we are aware of. This is like the creation of a human being. Okay, guys, we rise up in our spaceship again of 15th century Renaissance. And now we are going to look at a map, which is sort of the Silk Road and the trade routes. I mean, we think we travel a lot with flights and ships and everything else. Look at how much they traveled in those days. And this is a very ancient trade route. It's called the Silk Road. So people from Europe used to go all the way to China to get silk. And the other way around, Chinese and Indians and everyone else traveled on this road. If you remember June's presentation from last week, where she said Theosophy throughout the ages, June Valiant, she mentioned that ideas travel too. Now, translations of scriptures, translations of ideas. Now, the whole Greek, we actually have a Greco-Roman style up in Afghanistan, current Afghanistan, where the Buddha looks like a Greek sculpture. and a Roman, look. I mean, he was born somewhere in Nepal. There's no way he would look like a Roman. However, that's how he was represented in that area because of this influence of this travel of probably artists, sculptors, and scholars with the trade people. So there was a great deal of dissemination of ideas. And this was also a way that all this knowledge has been preserved for us, because people made copies and took it to their own countries, whereas in the country where it was, these esoteric knowledge was given out, was destroyed. So we are actually quite lucky that all these things happened. Otherwise, we wouldn't have most of the knowledge we have today. So this is the Silk Road, and you can see Eurasia and Africa in circa 870 AD. I just thought I'll give you a larger worldview. So you can think, okay, theosophical principles also travel like this. So now we come to the modern theosophical movement and some of the books that influence some of our artists whom we are familiar with. So the book called Isis Unveiled by H.P. Blavatsky was published in 1877, and it was sold out in the first few weeks. So they had to make a few more reprints, and that book traveled widely. And then Blavatsky and Alcott were invited from America to travel to England and then to India because of it. But this book was just went viral, to say it in our language. And then the esoteric Buddhism I found interesting. It is based on the Mahatma letters that A.P. Sinnett received. And W.B. Yeats, who's an Irish poet, he joined the society in 1884. So remember, HPB was still alive at that time. And then she wrote The Secret Doctrine, or it got published by 1888, and she passed away in 1891. So these three books had a huge impact. Now, if you think of the Theosophical Society in 1800s, we don't have as many books as we have today. These were the books they all studied. And now if you open The Secret Doctrine, you can't understand a word, even today, because it's quite complex. However, the scientists, poets, and artists of the time all used it. So now I have a very, very short glimpse of theosophy and literature. And I'd like to share with you just how it impacted the literature. Modern theosophy had a certain influence on contemporary literature. Now, when I say contemporary, this is late 1800s and 1900s, early to mid 1900. So particularly in forms of genre fiction, such as fantasy and science fiction. Researchers claim that theosophy has significantly influenced the Irish literary renaissance of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, notably in such figures as W.B. Yeats and G.W. Russell. I also, in my last presentation that I gave years ago on art and theosophy, I learned that there were 4 lodges in Ireland which had all artists and poets and sculptors. So imagine a whole lodge of artists and what discussions they would have had on the very same literature we all study. It would have been amazing. So it I think the poem called Wastelands is often quoted to show us how theosophy influenced W.B. Yeats. And there are some other authors, also authors such as Dostoevsky, who's a Russian author who wrote some very big stories. I have not read them, sorry. I can't even say the names of the books. I think it's called The Brothers Karamazov or something like that. Anyway, he is too depressing for me, so I didn't read it. It wasn't a light reading, so I've never read it. But I've read a lot of Tolstoy. So their works really were influenced by theosophy because of the before mentioned books that I mentioned. And Edward Bulwer Lytton also wrote a couple of fictions. Tolstoy wrote a lot of stories as well, and Franz Hartmann wrote some stories, and Mabel Collins also wrote a few books. So this is just a glimpse. I only chose 5 of them. There are many, many authors who wrote books on fiction, because again, something that cannot be represented, you have to say it in stories so that something within you will hear it. I mean, isn't it why that Jesus Christ and many of the other teachers like Paramahamsa Ramakrishna and all those people use parables and allegories? That's because these things can't be explained in normal language. Then we come to another book, which is more early 1900, which had a far greater influence on the visual arts. And this is the book called Thought Forms by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater. So this is the frontispiece where it shows the different colors of, the top left corner is high spirituality. This one, this dark blue, is devotion with affection because it has a bit of pink in it. Then there's devotion to a noble ideal, that is totally blue. And if you remember the aura of the Sufis, they had a blue inner circle and then a yellow circle. So if you go to the yellow, it is highest intellect. So these were a result of the clairvoyant investigations by Leadbeater and Annie Besant in the late 1800s. Now with Leadbeater, he got training to become clairvoyant. With Annie Besant, she just got it overnight because it was some work she had done in a previous life, which was triggered, and she was able to do the investigation on atoms and this kind of investigation about the aura and colors and thought forms. So now we come to thought forms. Now, I don't think anyone knew in the Western world that our thoughts actually created forms. They still do, by the way. This is not just happening in the 19th century. Our thoughts today are creating forms in the mental world. So this is a couple of examples of what Leadbeater saw on the inner planes when music was played in a church. And then on the right is the temple in Adyar, where we have a half-an-hour ceremony with chanting in it. So you will see, you can actually build a form on the astral and probably the mental plane by what we do here on the physical plane. And now most artists they may not know it, but they are able to kind of download it and it happens in their art. Like that person, that art I showed you, that monk who was visualizing a tantric visualization, you will see the colors were sort of same. However, when you imagine these things, you have to think of them like sunlight. It's not a static image, it's moving and it's very bright, and it's not the colors that we can see on the physical plane. There will be far more colors, but of course it's hard to reproduce it. Now here are some examples of thought forms. That book is amazing. I highly recommend reading it. I think there's some available online. So on the left, we have grasping animal affection. That's like when a dog comes running towards you, the top left, that's how the thought form is. The little, it wants affection, it wants you to pat it and all that. So that's one. Now, maybe some of you today listening to this talk will have this thought form because you have the intention to know. Some of you might have fallen asleep. We don't know what thought forms you are creating. And, and if you are angry, it has murderous rage and sustained anger, then you'll have these red streaks going out of you. However, on the brighter side, on the right, you can see this purple on yellow. It is an aspiration to enfold all. Now, these are forms that are created during meditation. So it's up to you what thoughts you're going to be creating at any given moment and what forms that you are, putting your energy into. And that's what is always floating around you and going from you. Now, thought and me, of course, the thought has two ways of behaving. It behaves like a wave. A part of it goes out like a wave. We did the universal invocation at the start, and June told us about how it has a effect like a wave from you towards into your environment. The same way, it also, a thought form also is created when you have a thought, or when you focus on a thought, or when you sit down to meditate, or you're thinking of your loved one. You actually, there are hearts that will go off to the loved one. So again, we jump into the angelic kingdom if we can, because you have to die to do that if you want to become an angel. However, since none of us want to do that now, we'll just see some examples. This one you will learn more about when Bill Keaton will do his presentation 2 weeks from now on the Deva and angelic kingdom. So on the left is a mountain, and that's like a fire Deva, I think, or the Deva of the mountain. This is how Jeffrey Hodgson perceived it. So every big, I'm sure our Wellington harbor has a angel. So all big natural places have a large angel. The tree and plants in your garden, they have the tiny ones. So this is another whole parallel evolution. If you're really interested to know about this, please come and listen to Bill's talk. I just wanted to, because mine is the overview talk, I thought I'll mention this. So the Kingdom of the Gods is the book about the angelic kingdom, and that's Jeffrey Hodgson and his wife Sandra, who did a lot of work together on this and many other subjects. Now we come to Hilma F. Klint. Now she became a member, I think around 1883 or 1885 in the Swedish section of the society, and she had a group of 5 people who would get together and talk about these things. And remember, that was the first time, again, like the Neoplatonists, that women and men would get together in theosophical lodges and have these discussions and things like that. So the movie about On Her is amazing. I highly recommend you people watching it on YouTube or other places. This is the middle picture was taken when the 4 of us went to see the exhibition by Sai. And the one on the left is from Wikipedia. It's actually one of my favorites, and I'm glad it was on the public domain. So the argument is that Hilma af Klint was actually the very first person, unknown to the rest of the world, who actually created the very first abstract painting, which had circles or something like that. Anyway, the point is, unless you have exhibited, you're not considered that you'd started it. Anyway, that's beside the point. The point is her studies in theosophy, again, something that cannot be represented. What are you going to do about it? Of course, you're going to come up with circles and squares and triangles. And so that was Hilma af Klint. To know more, you have to come next week to Caleb Gordon's talk, and then Dr. Johanna's talk, which is the last one on 26 July. So you all had better still be on the spaceship for 6 weeks. There's no rest for the wicked. And next we come to a very popular person who many people know. His name is Wassily Kandinsky. He is considered the father of abstract art. And just to let you know, I just love this period. I liked art up to the 1940s. After that, I didn't bother. I thought they were all drug addicts and things like that anyway, but I didn't study after abstract expressionism. However, I think I have matured a bit now. If I study it, I'll look at it differently. Anyway, I just loved this period of abstract art when I studied. And Kandinsky is very, very interesting because he came across the theosophical literature, and I'm not sure if he joined the society or not. However, it influenced him so much that it just changed. And also he went and saw the exhibition of Monet or Manning and his haystacks. And he was just blown away, because until then it was the other movements where it was all about realism and romantic movement, where everything was represented in form and landscapes. And suddenly he's looking at these haystacks that don't look like haystacks. And there are several paintings of the same haystack in different light and color. And again, it was the color that just, influenced him so much. So he came across a thought forms book and things like that. And I watched one of the talks that went into great detail about his work from the Theosophical Society in America by Dan Noga. And he said these, he didn't just splash color like this. He spent a lot of time for each work of his, because he pondered, he just stayed with a word. So for him, he thought the representative art of his time was just a representation. It wasn't going to connect you to the unknown. So his work, he said, music is the only art form that connects you to the one, let's say, or the inner side of things, because every other art form is representing it. But with music, you are with it. It's like, again, a dimension of consciousness. So he wanted to give us the experience of getting in touch with the dimension of consciousness when you looked at his art. So, Hilma of Klint, when she did her work for so many years, she stipulated that her work shouldn't be exhibited for at least 40 years after her death. So no one knew that this whole painting collection was stored in the basement of her nephew's house until recently. And I've heard that people go to these exhibitions and are moved to tears. Why? Why should you stand and cry in front of a painting? Because it connects us to this inner side of the whole of creation. So I think that's exactly what Kandinsky also did. And all his works are, amazing. I mean, one day, hopefully, we'll all be able to see him, his big, works of art too. Now you can go to Wikipedia, there are quite a few images there. I will read this out because there are people watching on the mobile phone and all that. This writing in the Blue Rider Almanac, because Kandinsky founded a small group called the Blue Rider, and he wrote a book called On the Spiritual in Art, or it's also translated as Concerning the Spiritual in Art, which was released in 1910, were both a defense and a promotion of abstract art and an affirmation that all forms of art were equally capable of reaching a level of spirituality. He believed that color could be used in a painting as something autonomous, apart from the visual description of an object or other form. So this is like he's trying to reach the Tao through painting and color, because we do experience color differently. Because our branch secretary Pam, she's so much into color. She did a talk in Palmerston North on colors and how it affects us. So hopefully one day we'll be able to listen to her in Wellington as well. Now here's another favorite artist of mine. His name is Piet Mondrian, and he joined the Dutch section in 1908. And he says, I got everything from the Secret Doctrine in 1918. So in 10 years, that's what he did. He studied the Secret Doctrine and he produced his painting. Now, please remember, all these artists were not welcomed with open arms. They were all groundbreakers and trendsetters and what they call disruptors in today's world. So this is like one of the somewhere in the middle of his career. And he was also trying to find the spiritual through his art. So even the Wikipedia article on him is very interesting. It was just so inspiring to read how he related to art. And please remember, this was also the time of the world wars, both of them. So the artists got displaced, they had to leave their countries, go and come back and again go away. Some of them were banned from the exhibition places, all kinds of things. But they were so keen on actually finding the spiritual. In fact, Wassily Kandinsky was a lawyer. He gave up his very lucrative career to go and study art in Vienna so that he could be an artist. So it's amazing. Now we come to the almost end of my presentation. And I want to share with you something really interesting that I kind of connected. I'm one of those connects all kinds of dots together. So here is H.P. Blavatsky and Ursula Le Guin. So here's what H.P. Blavatsky writes when Dostoevsky passed away in 1881. She says, "What the European world now needs is a dozen writers such as Dostoevsky, the Russian author. It is writers of this kind that are needed in our day of reawakening. Not authors writing for wealth or fame, but fearless apostles of the living word of truth. Moral healers of the pustulous sores of our century. To write novels with a moral sense in them deep enough to stir society requires a literary talent and a born theosophist, as was Dostoevsky." HPB wrote this in 1881. And now I came across Ursula Le Guin. She was awarded some great award in 2014. And in her acceptance speech, this is what she said. Now, Ursula Le Guin has written some amazing book. It's a trilogy of the Earthsea. This is like a precursor of Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a watered down version of Theosophy, according to me. The first time I read the Philosopher's Stone, I thought, what is this going on? This is what I've been studying in Theosophy, but it's nice. It's nice for kids. Anyway, I'm sure adults liked it too. I read all of them, I think. And they were so good because exactly what we learn in Theosophy is in a story form. Now, Ursula Le Guin's books also I have read. It's called the Earthsea trilogy of a very similar character who goes out on this journey, and there is this person who can't be named, I think, even in that story. Anyway, it's a journey of the soul, I think, and that's one of her first books. So by the time she got this award, she'd written many, many books, and she's one of the few women authors who writes science fiction, I think. Yeah, or fantasy fiction, I'm not sure. Anyway, she wrote a lot of similar books, and she said in her acceptance speech, "I think hard times are coming when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, who can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine some real grounds for hope. We will need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality." Isn't that amazing? Both of them, doesn't matter what century, are saying the same thing, that we need visionaries, we need theosophists, we need poets, we need writers, everything, who have a capacity to be a realist of a larger reality. And that's what our studies in theosophy gives us. And in wherever you come across theosophy, like you just saw, it's everywhere if you can just, get hold of it. And it is designed in such a way that every human being can get access to it over the centuries, and in our own time too. So thank you. Oh, I'm 9 minutes over time. I hope you're okay with it. So Simon, over to you.
Thanks, Sushma. Fantastic. Do you want to, we'll have some questions, some comments, and we'll just, yeah, that's great. Fantastic. So comments, thoughts, anyone?
You'll have to unmute your mics and maybe raise your hand or something. Oh, there are lots
Chris.
of chats.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, just going to say thank you, Sushma. I've been absolutely riveted to everything you've said. It's been so very interesting. I really hadn't realized the depth of what has been revealed through art. I really didn't understand that at all. You know, odd things that I've come across have been sort of obvious to me, but yeah, you've really given us some very in-depth knowledge. Thank you. Yeah, a lot to think about, and I've made a lot of notes because some things I'd like to just go back and look at it perhaps in more depth. So I'll just ask you one thing. When you displayed on the screen that very famous poem from Rumi, I used to have that full poem. I'm just wondering if it would be convenient for you to send that out on email for those of us who'd like to have a copy of it, please.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say, Sushma, that was brilliant, but then we never get anything but that from you. It was really, really interesting and worthwhile. So I thank you.
Thank you, Maureen.
To say. Beautiful.
June has a
June, yep, thanks.
Yeah, you mentioned Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. There is actually a fourth book in that trilogy, and in that fourth book, Gerd has to go and release everybody who's trapped behind the wall of death. So that one is also worth reading. Also, Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, all of it. You'll really remember when they made the first book into a movie called Golden Compass, some of the Christians got very upset about the magisterium, which is based on Catholic Church, as far as I could see. However, if you read the whole thing, they were nitpicking when there was a bomb falling on their heads, because you get further along and it's talking about the Antichrist and the, what's the word for it? The God that isn't God, the demiurge. So there's a huge amount of Gnostic philosophy in His Dark Materials. And these are supposedly written for children.
Amazing. Thank you, June. Would you like to read what's in the chat, Simon?
Okay. Yeah, Craig says most interesting, many thanks. And Ganesh said thank you as well. He's logged off. Arnie said, well done, Sushma. You covered a great deal in the session, poetry, art, philosophy. So really appreciated that. Yep.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I hope that was good. It was an overview. I mean, it was like a crash course in art history.
Well, it was an excellent crash course.
Yeah.
You know, I've learned so much from this short session. Thank you.
You're welcome. I just chose the things that you might come across in the next 5 weeks, so that when you hear it again, you'll understand where in the history of humanity this came up, and it'll be really valuable. I thought to get this overview.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah, Brett, go. Yep.
I'd just like to, you know, we keep sort of mentioning that Theosophy has helped to seed a lot of stuff in the modern world since its inception. And one of the contemporaries of HPB, you know, Rudolf Steiner was a theosophist originally, and then went off and started his own anthroposophical society. But he did it, you know, as having that theosophical background. He did a huge study on art. I mean, he's a stalwart of you know, the artistic movement and the way he does education. And you know, I was always interested in Steiner as a and it was interesting showing the TS to see the link.
Steiner actually had a great impact on art at that time as well. Steiner was the General Secretary of the German section for many years. Lots of branches came into establishment during his time. He was very into theosophy, and then he moved on and started anthroposophy. And then that, as you say, Brett had lots of impact on several areas of life, and especially art too. Lots of artists were influenced by the anthroposophical philosophy as well. You'll learn more about it in the other presentations that are coming up, because Hilma of Klint also went and stayed in the I think it's called the Waldorf building or something like that.
Yeah.
So you'll learn more about it in the coming sessions.
I'm going to put someone on the spot here. Joanna, would you like to say hello?
Sure. I just want to thank you for that seminar. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the enthusiasm and the focus on, it was the bigger picture focus of how art expresses the inexpressible, that general sense that crosses all of it. Yeah, it was cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Great. Yeah, no, Joanna will be finishing off the last talk in our series, end of July. So great to have you here. Sam, do you want to say hi?
Oh, he's chatting and saying, thanks, Sushma, well done. I hope he doesn't disappear. Sam.
Sam, this is Sam Sampson. He'll be doing a session for us. Sam, say good day.
Yeah, hello, everyone. Thanks, Sushma. That was pretty incredible, actually. The Bertrand Russell of the Theosophical Society. the tome of intellectualism. I mean, there was so much there that you put in. I was quite impressed, actually, and so many different angles. It was really well done. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, look forward to hearing a bit more. Anyway, I don't think anyone could match that overview. Anyway.
I tried my best.
All right.
After seeing the program and the range of speakers,
Yeah.
It's an amazing set of topics. So I just needed to do an overview. So when each of you attends any of the sessions, it gives you a context.
Yeah, and it was great too. You touched on lots of poetical things as well, which is quite interesting right through. Which from as you said, the Wasteland of T.S. Eliot, which with a huge number of footnotes through modernism at the time, which went on later on into the sort of 20th century, set it up. So yeah, well done once again, and now you can have a rest.
Yes, thank you. I've been having meetings since morning today, 9 o'clock. This is my 4th one.
Oh, right.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, everyone. So I'll give a vote of thanks, Sushma. Fantastic. Really good. So
yeah, we'll just have the announcements and stuff.
Yep. Okay.
I'll just stop the recording. Give me a moment, guys. Otherwise,